Defenders of parks and streets, which indeed is an honorable profession, we are now becoming the defenders of our republic and the defenders of democracy. And it is heartwarming to be here with all of you because, I see your name on amicus briefs. I see your faces on TV. I feel the support from across the entire country, and we recognize that one great American city is experiencing an invasion. That is an invasion on our democracy, on our republic, and on each and every one of us. And the fact that you all are standing up means the world.
Hold on, because what's unfolding in Minneapolis right now represents one of the most significant confrontations between federal and local authorities in recent American history, as the White House's border czar has just announced plans to reduce the number of federal forces deployed in the Minnesota city following 2 fatal shootings that have sparked nationwide outrage and pushed the country to the brink of a partial government shutdown. Tom Homan, the administration's top immigration enforcement official, stood before reporters in Minneapolis on Thursday and declared that a drawdown of federal forces would indeed take place. But he was emphatic that the mission itself was not being abandoned. His exact words were clear. The drawdown is going to happen, but the administration is not surrendering its mission at all, only doing it smarter. The announcement came as pressure mounted from all sides, from protesters in the streets to lawmakers in the halls of Congress, following the deaths of 2 American citizens at the hands of agents carrying out President Trump's immigration crackdown. The information emerged during a press conference held by Homan in Minneapolis itself, where he addressed questions about the federal operation that has consumed the city and captured the nation's attention. The briefing provided some insight into the administration's thinking, though critical details remained unclear. Homan did not specify how many federal forces might actually leave Minneapolis, nor did he provide a timeline for when any reduction might occur. These omissions have raised fresh questions about the extent to which the Trump administration genuinely intends to scale back its controversial operation, particularly after President Trump himself indicated he was seeking to de-escalate the situation in the city. What is known is that the killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, both American citizens, occurred this month as federal agents were conducting immigration enforcement operations under Trump's directive. These deaths have triggered protests throughout Minneapolis, generated public outcry across the United States, and prompted calls from lawmakers in both the Democratic and Republican parties for certain administration officials to be removed from their positions. The gravity of the situation cannot be overstated, as it has brought together voices from across the political spectrum in expressing concern about how the federal operation has been conducted. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey have both called for the complete withdrawal of federal agents from the state's capital region. Their demands go beyond a mere reduction in numbers. They want the federal presence gone entirely. The state has taken legal action as well, asking a federal judge to halt what has been designated as Operation Metro Surge, the name given to the deployment of approximately 3,000 Immigration, Border Patrol, and other Department of Homeland Security officers to the Minneapolis area. The administration, for its part, has responded to these local leaders with sharp criticism. White House officials have said that state and local authorities should be cooperating with federal officers and agents rather than resisting them. The administration has also taken aim at Minneapolis specifically for maintaining what it describes as a sanctuary city policy, a designation referring to the city's prohibition on its employees enforcing federal immigration laws. This fundamental disagreement over immigration enforcement represents the core of the conflict that has been escalating in Minneapolis. During his Thursday press conference, Homan made it clear that any changes to the federal operation would be contingent upon how much cooperation the administration receives from state and local officials. He stated that the administration disagreed with some of the demands put forward by both Frey and Walz, though he did not specify which particular demands were being rejected. This lack of specificity has left observers uncertain about where common ground might be found between the federal government and local authorities. The timeline of recent events shows just how quickly this situation has evolved. In the hours immediately following the killing of Alex Preddy on Saturday, Governor Walz had two separate phone conversations with the White House. Since that time, both Walz and Mayor Frey, who are both members of the Democratic Party, have participated in phone calls directly with President Trump. These communications suggest that the highest levels of government are engaged in attempting to resolve the crisis, though the outcome of those conversations remains to be seen. Homan provided relatively few concrete details about what specific changes the administration would be willing to implement in Minneapolis. He did say that the federal operation would become more targeted going forward, but he offered no additional elaboration on what that term might mean in practical application. The lack of clarity on this point has done little to satisfy critics who are demanding substantive reforms to how immigration enforcement is being carried out in the city. While pledging to fix the situation in Minneapolis, Homan simultaneously defended the broader immigration enforcement measures that the administration has been pursuing. He argued that tightening border security and targeting undocumented immigrants for deportation have made the country safer, a claim that supporters of the administration's policies frequently make. This defense of the overall approach suggests that while tactical adjustments may be made in Minneapolis, the fundamental strategy is not under reconsideration. The scale of the Trump administration's immigration enforcement efforts has been substantial. During Trump's first year back in office, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE, which operates under the Department of Homeland Security, carried out more than 480,000 deportations. This figure comes from an agency document that was obtained by CBS News, the BBC's partner organization in the United States. The number exceeds the previous record high of 410,000 deportations, which was recorded in 2012 during the presidency of Barack Obama. Currently, according to the document, the Department of Homeland Security is holding more than 75,000 people in detention facilities across the country. The federal deployment to Minneapolis is part of a broader pattern that has defined Trump's approach since returning to office. The president has sent federal agents, along with National Guard personnel, to major cities throughout the United States in an effort to fulfill his campaign promise to crack down on illegal immigration. These deployments have been met with protests and legal challenges, particularly in cities led by Democratic administrations such as Portland, Los Angeles, and Chicago. The confrontation in Minneapolis, however, has emerged as the most acute crisis among these various operations. The administration's handling of the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy appears to have reached what many observers are describing as a boiling point. Frustration has been building both on the streets of Minneapolis, where protesters have been demonstrating regularly, and in the halls of Capitol Hill, where members of Congress have been expressing increasing concern. In response to this mounting pressure, President Trump dispatched Homan to Minneapolis this week to assume direct control of the operation. This move effectively sidelined Gregory Bovino, the Border Patrol chief who had been leading not only the Minneapolis operation, but also similar crackdowns in Chicago and other American cities. Whether Homan's remarks on Thursday will be sufficient to appease lawmakers in Washington remains an open question at this stage. The political ramifications of the Minneapolis situation have extended well beyond the city itself and have become entangled with broader debates about government funding and the role of federal law enforcement agencies. Several Republicans in both the House of Representatives and the Senate have called for investigations into the shootings of Good and Preddy. This represents a notable development, as members of the president's own party are demanding accountability for what transpired in Minneapolis. The fact that these calls are coming from Republicans suggests that concern about the federal operation crosses partisan lines to at least some degree. Senate Democrats, meanwhile, have issued a threat of their own. They have said they will force a partial government shutdown if a spending package currently under consideration includes new funding for the Department of Homeland Security. This represents a significant escalation in the political battle over immigration enforcement, as Democrats are using the legislative tool of budget negotiations to attempt to force changes in how federal agencies operate. On Thursday, the spending dispute reached a critical juncture. 7 Senate Republicans joined with Democrats in blocking a procedural vote on the spending bill, a development that has substantially increased the likelihood of a partial government shutdown occurring at the end of the week. The defection of these Republican senators represents a blow to the administration's efforts to secure funding and suggests that discontent with the situation in Minneapolis has created fractures within the Republican caucus. The vote took place as Senate leaders and White House officials worked behind the scenes on a potential compromise deal. According to information that has emerged from these negotiations, the deal under discussion would remove Department of Homeland Security funding from the larger spending package. This would allow the government to continue sending money to other federal agencies while giving both sides additional time to negotiate a separate spending plan specifically for the Department of Homeland Security. Whether this compromise can attract sufficient support to pass remains uncertain. Senate Democrats have made clear what they want included in any bill that provides funding to the Department of Homeland Security. They are demanding restrictions on the tactics that Immigration and Customs Enforcement uses when conducting operations in the field. Specifically, Democrats are calling for ICE agents to stop wearing masks during operations and to cease carrying out searches and arrests without first obtaining a warrant from a judge. These demands come in response to a memo that was made public earlier this month, in which ICE authorized its agents to conduct searches without warrants, a practice that has generated significant legal and constitutional concerns. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer addressed the chamber on Thursday and framed the dispute in stark terms. He described the current moment as one of truth, declaring that what ICE is doing outside the bounds of the law constitutes state-sanctioned thuggery that must be stopped. The strong language from the Democratic leader reflects the intensity of feeling among opposition lawmakers regarding the federal immigration operation and its tactics. President Trump addressed the spending dispute during a cabinet meeting held on Thursday. He indicated that the White House was actively working with Democrats to find a path that would avoid a government shutdown. The president's willingness to engage in negotiations suggests recognition that the political situation has become untenable and that some form of compromise may be necessary to prevent a broader governmental crisis. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey continued his public campaign against the federal operation on Thursday, speaking at a conference for mayors being held in Washington. He reiterated his call for a complete end to the federal presence in his city. Additionally, Frey visited Capitol Hill, where he presumably engaged with lawmakers to press his case for the withdrawal of federal forces from Minneapolis. Frey provided specific figures about the scope of the federal deployment to Minneapolis that highlight the dramatic disparity in numbers between federal and local law enforcement. According to the mayor, there are between 3,000 and 4,000 federal forces currently operating in the city. This figure vastly exceeds the 600 local police officers employed by Minneapolis itself. When asked to confirm or update these numbers during his press conference, Homan did not provide a specific figure, leaving the exact size of the federal presence unclear. The mayor also described the impact that the federal operation has had on the city's residents. Frey stated that people have been indiscriminately pulled off the street and that American citizens have been removed from their homes based solely on their appearance, specifically because they look like they might be from Mexico, Ecuador, or Somalia. He characterized these actions as fundamentally contrary to American values, stating that this is not how the country operates. These allegations from the mayor paint a picture of a federal operation that has, in his view, overstepped constitutional boundaries and violated the civil liberties of residents. At this stage, numerous questions remain unanswered about how the situation in Minneapolis will evolve in the coming days and weeks. The precise nature and timing of the federal drawdown that Homan announced have not been specified. The outcome of the spending negotiations in Washington remains uncertain. Whether the compromise being discussed can prevent a government shutdown is not yet known. How state and local officials in Minnesota will respond to Homan's announcement, and whether they will view it as sufficient progress also remains to be seen. What is clear is that the federal immigration operation in Minneapolis has become a flashpoint in American politics, touching on fundamental questions about federalism, civil liberties, immigration enforcement, and the use of federal power in cities. The deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy have transformed what might have been a routine enforcement operation into a national crisis that has captured public attention and forced political leaders at all levels to grapple with difficult questions about how immigration law should be enforced in the United States. The situation continues to develop, and additional information is expected to emerge as federal officials implement whatever changes they have decided upon, as negotiations in Washington continue, and as state and local leaders in Minnesota respond to the evolving federal posture. The coming days will likely provide more clarity on whether the drawdown Homan announced represents a genuine shift in approach or merely a tactical adjustment that leaves the fundamental nature of the operation unchanged. For now, Minneapolis remains at the center of a national debate about immigration, federal authority, and the limits of enforcement power, with the eyes of the country fixed on what happens next in the Minnesota city.